blessingwhite.com. I'd like to introduce you to today's presenters, Leah Clark and Zach Curtis. Leah Clark leads strategy and planning for Blessing White, focusing on bringing new products to market and enhancing the participant experience. She works with clients to understand their leadership and engagement challenges and consults with them on creative solutions. With over 17 years of experience, Leah is a certified professional coach and holds an MA in organizational psychology from Columbia University and a BA in English and sociology from Boston College. Zach Curtis graduated with an MA in social organizational psychology from Columbia University and spent the last 8 years in the not-for-profit space as a leadership, development, and team effectiveness consultant. As a new member of the Blessing White team, Zach brings a fresh perspective and approach to the career needs of an ever-adapting workforce. You are all in very qualified hands, and so with that, Leah, I will go ahead and turn this over to you.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for joining us today. As Kayla mentioned, I have a background in organizational psychology as well as marketing and strategy. And more importantly, I come from a family of teachers and professors, so education and learning has always been a core value of mine. And we'll get into core values a little bit over the course of the next hour or so. And I'm very fortunate that I have the opportunity every day to work in an industry that focuses on learning and development, and a company that keeps pushing for innovation while being surrounded by very talented and genuinely good people. One of those individuals, of whom is my colleague, Zach Curtis. Zach, do you want to chime in and say hello?
Hey, thanks, Leah. Yes, I'm really excited to work on this project with Leah as well. My time in the not-for-profit space, I think, was really special and really unique because the organizations I worked with were very explicitly mission-oriented and mission-driven, and so when I joined at Blessing White and was asked to reapproach our career point of view and offering, I couldn't think of anything more mission-critical to individuals in a personal way, and so I'm really excited to be working on this alongside Leah.
Great, thanks, Zach. So thanks again for taking some time out of your day to spend a little time with us and talk about career, and more specifically, how to have the career conversations your employees want to have. So I'm just going to try and advance the slides. There we go. Great. So we're going to spend the next 45 minutes or so talking about what we know and what we've learned employees really want from career conversations and career development. And the research that we've done and the experience we have suggests that employees want conversations around career that need to shift and change. And we'll touch upon the impact of having or not having those career conversations on retention and engagement. And we titled this webinar, Can the Plan, for a reason. And it's because we believe that the concept of a multi-year plan really feels antiquated. It's outdated. And that question that often gets asked in interviews or sometimes in career conversations, where do you see yourself in 10 years, feels a little silly. It's an almost ridiculous question, even to look 5 years out, given the pace of change and how rapid it is, and because we're living in a world where even weekly one-on-ones can seem too infrequent. And so with this in mind, in the spring of this year, we conducted career research to get a pulse on individual attitudes about career. We wanted to understand how often are people thinking about their career, how often are they talking about it, and where do they need the most support. But before we get into a discussion about careers today, we thought it might be interesting to think about some careers, some jobs that existed once upon a time. So just for fun and to give our latecomers a little time to catch up, we wanted to share with you some of the jobs that were really important to some people once upon a time but no longer exist. So these are real jobs that at one point existed. Pin setter, so this person set the pins at a bowling alley, and while I'm not a big bowler myself, I know Zach is, and I anticipate that this particular role probably would have made what is a slow game for me move even more slowly. The second job, phrenologist, which I learned is an individual who reads the intelligence by the shape of your head. And Zach and I were talking about the fact that this would probably make the interview process go a heck of a lot faster and easier if that role was still around. And then pre-radar listener for aircraft, and I honestly think I like this one for the sheer humor of the image here. But these individuals, as I've learned, had the important job of listening for oncoming aircraft and then sounding an alarm bell. And then last but not least, human alarm clock. These individuals would go from window to window, tapping on them to make sure that people got up to go to work. And this was a real job, which no longer exists, except for anyone who has kids that they need to wake up for school will attest to, this job does exist, and today they're called parents. So now let's look at the flip side of jobs that didn't exist just 10 years ago. So app developer. The iPhone came out in 2007, and after that, of course, everybody went crazy for apps and spends a lot of time looking at their phone in apps today. In fact, there are 19 million software developers in the world, and 50% of those are focused on creating apps. Social media manager, an important job, particularly in the age of digital leadership. So we know what a powerful force social media can be, and so an important role for many companies and political figures is a social media manager. And then finally, Lyft driver. There are over 7,000 Lyft drivers, which is just amazing to me. 7,000 in a world that did not even have this job just 10 years ago. So we don't need a crystal ball, right? It's right in front of us. We don't need a crystal ball to know that the career landscape is changing. And so it makes sense that our career conversations are something that we need to look at differently. But how? Blessing White has historically done career research, and the results I'll share with you today are some of the questions we've asked year over year to understand trends in people's attitudes about career. But we also wanted to understand better just how much people today want to talk about their career and what are their expectations about how their managers can help. This is something that has been of great interest to us. But the first thing we wondered is, are people really thinking about their career on a regular basis? You know, with all they have going on, is this something that as they go about their day, earning a living, you know, taking care of children, balancing all they have to balance, is career something that they spend some time thinking about? I mean, we think it's important as an organization, and we support active career management. We talk about it, we support our clients on this issue, but most people going about their day-to-day, are they thinking about or actively managing their career? And so it's probably no surprise to you that one of the first questions we wondered is, are people thinking about their careers regularly? And what we found out is, you bet they are. 28% say they are actively managing their career, and 38% say they often think about their career. And if you add the individuals who are often or periodically thinking about their career, those numbers jump another 29%. And so it turns out that people are thinking about their career, and why wouldn't they be? When we step back and think about it, career is so intensely personal. You heard Zach mention that as a big reason why he's motivated to work on this particular area. And it has an impact on so many facets, really, of people's lives, right? So more than any other area that we focus on in professional development, this one hits at the core. This one has a direct impact on both practical issues, compensation, you know, how you collect a paycheck and put food on the table, as well as much more deeply personal issues about what you value and what's important to you. So perhaps it's no surprise that people are at least thinking about their career, and many more are actively managing it. So this then led into the next series of questions we asked about, which has to do with how often people want to engage in a career conversation with their manager. And we'll show you those results in a moment. But first, we thought it might be interesting to give those of you on the call the chance to weigh in on how you think most respondents answered the following question. How often do you think people want to talk to their managers about their careers? So we'll open the polls now.
Yep, the poll should be open. We're going to give it about a minute for folks to go ahead and input their answers. So if you have not already, go ahead and please do so. It looks like they are coming in right now. There's definitely a clear winner. So we'll give it just a few more seconds and we'll go ahead and close it out.
So Zach, when you, as you study this and as you think about career, when you think about your own existence, you know, do you think about what you do as a job or as a career? How would you distinguish between the two, and how do you think about it?
Well, I do think about my own existence quite frequently. You know, I'll confess, I thought about my existence at work as a job, as mostly a job, until I got into the research and started doing a little bit more poking around and interacting with people at work, and I realized I'm in my career and I need to think about it that way. And so my thinking has actually shifted over the last several months.
Great. So it looks like our poll results are in, and hopefully you can all see them on the screen. So by and large, this group said quickly and often on a casual basis, 43%, monthly or quarterly. And that's relatively consistent with the trend that we're seeing and the results that we heard from our research. And the bottom line is this: what we learned is that much like many of the individuals on the phone, people want to talk about their careers much more regularly on an informal basis. Our research said or showed that 39% want to have at least a quarterly discussion with their managers, and 15% want to talk about it monthly, another 15% quickly and often on a casual basis. So 77% want to talk at least quarterly, if not more frequently. And this is also consistent with a trend that we're seeing and that we talked about a couple of months ago, similar with coaching. It's this idea that everyday coaching conversations, everyday career conversations, even everyday engagement conversations are something that we should be striving for, to bring those discussions into the day-to-day cadence of your interaction with your managers and other people in your organization. It's something that we should strive for, and that people are saying that they want more and more. The problem that we soon discovered when we looked at the research, and you'll see this in the lower part of the page, is that while people want to talk about their career more frequently, there's a widening gap between the desired frequency and the actual frequency. Because the reality is that most people are talking about their career annually, at best, and another 28% never talk to their managers about their career. And this is really, you know, I think such a risky proposition, because if you're not talking to your employees about their career, they'll start to wonder if you care. You know, they may start to wonder what opportunities exist for them, what's their future within your organization. And quite honestly, I think they'll be very vulnerable to looking for new opportunities and to engaging in career conversations with other people and other organizations. And then that leads to the big T, turnover. And even if they stay, even if turnover is something that you avoid, they're vulnerable to lower engagement. So neither one of those things are desirable. And so you wonder if they're vulnerable to turnover, low engagement, why is it that managers don't have these conversations? And what our experience has told us, and I'm sure many on the phone would be nodding their heads or echoing this, is that one of the reasons managers don't engage in career conversations is because they're concerned that they won't have promotions or raises, and they're afraid that that's what the individual is going to ask for when they engage in that career dialogue. So managers sometimes equate career conversations with compensation conversations, and the managers, at least that we've talked to, have indicated that's just one reason they don't initiate these career conversations. And so we then said, all right, well, let's ask a question to help us get a sense for whether or not compensation is the crux of what people want to talk to their managers about when they sit down to talk career. So let's see, well, first let's see what you think we found out when we asked this question. So here's our next poll question. How do you think most employees answered this question? So not you personally, but what's your guess about how most employees answered the question, when you talk about your career, what's most important for your manager to understand?
And again, the poll is now open. We'll give it about 30 more seconds and we'll close the poll. Looks like those numbers are coming in nicely. And as with before, it does look like there is a clear winner. So we'll go ahead and close out here just shortly.
So, we've talked about, and we will talk about the role of the manager in supporting career conversations, but there are other influencers, and Zach, again, I'm curious. We're giving people a little bit of a window into who you are, and I'll give you the opportunity to turn the tables later. But who influences your career today? Who's a big influencer on career for you?
Well, I think I'd have to say my wife. So I'm married, have been for a while. We don't have kids yet. We do have a brand new puppy. But she's not yet dictating my career moves. But I think that any big changes at work come down to a conversation with my wife, and we talk a lot about what we're trying to do and what our priorities are before we make any big decisions.
And we'll talk about that a little bit later when we get into what that new definition of career looks like and how people can get broader career support than their manager. Manager plays a critical role, and we are really imploring people to broaden their career community. So that's something that we're hearing and we'll talk about. It looks like, with respect to this question, most people said D, my values and strengths and how I can do work that satisfies them. And that is, again, consistent with what we found out when we asked this question. So when individuals sit down to talk about their careers, they aren't interested primarily in promotion or compensation, although both are important. So I don't want to leave the impression that those are not important. But it's not the main event. Employees really want to talk about what's important to them, their strengths, and how they can do more work to satisfy them. So that fear that we talked about a minute ago, that if I have this career conversation, I'm going to need to talk compensation, is somewhat unfounded. They want to talk about more than that. They want you to listen to them. They want you to understand what's important to them. And these are critical conversations that as managers, we encourage people to stay super tuned into, and to tune into them in a very individual way, because a lot of times we'll say career is an individualized equation. And when your employee talks to you about, career satisfaction, what it means to them, you really need to listen, because the chances are they're telling you a lot in that discussion. We talked about how career is so deeply personal. They're telling you what matters to them. And it's important because even though they don't use this label, they're talking about their personal values. And that is not a one-size-fits-all conversation, because each individual's values are different. And it's a big payoff, because in addition to improved levels of trust and communication, you now have the insight you need as a manager to help match that individual to new opportunities that not only benefit them, but benefit the organization. So while we think individuals need to broaden the network of support that they have for career, we do believe that managers will undoubtedly continue to play a critical role. And the role of the manager, again, super critical. They have this very unique vantage point. They can see what's happening at the organizational level, what new roles may be available, what projects require certain skills to get things done, or where in the company additional resources are needed. And then at the same time, their vantage point is one where they are also the individuals most closely tuned in to what the people on their team want. Again, going back to that values and skills conversation. So this vantage point, seeing both the organizational and the individual needs, puts them in this position to play matchmaker between the two. This assumes, of course, that they are of the mindset that talent should be shared for the greater good of the organization and the individual. So it's not about hoarding talent, it's about sharing talent for the benefit of organizational goals and individual needs. And, you know, just kind of another point on that, some of the things to think about to encourage that, you know, do you reward the managers who share talent? Is that the kind of behavior that's rewarded in your organization? It'll pay dividends to encourage this type of talent sharing, because who wouldn't want to work for a manager that they see being super supportive of individual career development and growth, again, for the greater good of the organization and the individual's personal satisfaction. So manager will continue to play a super critical role. You know, we also asked a little bit about when you are going to look for your next position, whether it's in your organization or outside, what really motivates you? And again, moving away from that idea that it's compensation. There's more than that as a motivation. And what we've heard year over year as we've repeated this particular question in previous surveys is that the things that people are looking for in the next position are meaningful work, interesting work, and work-life balance. So when they do walk out the door, they're leaving for better opportunities and growth and for more interesting work. So that can seem a little bit scary. You know, thinking about your top talent walking out the doors is never a fun proposition. But there's some solace in what we've learned here. There's a fair bit of solace, in fact, which is that people don't need to leave the organization to get those things. They can find what they need with you. As long as you're having those conversations and helping to support their pursuit of new skills or work that satisfies them, we found that 85% of individuals we surveyed agreed that there is nothing wrong with staying in the same job if they can try new things or, in fact, develop their skills. So this is an important point with respect to another manager fear, which is that career conversations will open that Pandora's box that will cause them to lose their employee. The thought goes something like this. If I don't have a career conversation with my employee, they are less likely to leave. And what we're saying is that avoiding those conversations will actually have the reverse effect, that the lack of conversation is more likely to cause those employees to leave. So the message is step into those conversations, because the fear that a career conversation equals an organizational change for your employees are unfounded. So a lot of information that we've gathered, and then one that we asked just for fun, and we'll ask you to play along with us in this one. So in the spirit of pumpkin patches, Halloween, and corn mazes, this is our final question, although more information to share, just our final question. We asked people, what does career feel like? What metaphor best describes how you feel about your career? So let's take a look at what this group has to say.
Once again, the poll is now open, and so if you can go ahead and input your answers here, we will close out the poll in about 30 seconds.
Leah, which of these do you feel like represents your career?
I knew you were waiting to turn the tables on me. I would say, for me personally, probably the balance beam. You know, as a working mom, there's quite a bit that I'm typically juggling, and including weekend corn mazes and bounce houses. So I would say for me it's probably that balance beam, trying to keep both in balance. What about you?
I would have to say A for me. I think a spider web well represents my career so far.
Until you take your new dog to the corn maze and the bounce house, of course.
That's correct. She would eat the corn,
right.
And we'd have a disaster.
There you go. All right, so 42% of this group spiderweb, 31% corn maze. And so let's share with you a little bit, you know, relatively similar distribution to what we saw in our results. Here's what we heard. And look, well, there's a little bit of humor in this question. You know, I found the results were both heartening and somewhat challenging at the same time. So we looked at this and we took solace in the fact that people feel as though they're connected to people and ideas. And we saw this as a great opportunity to build on the concept of career connections and community and help individuals grow and expand their career development. And at the same time, we see challenges that other individuals are expressing, right? Struggling with balance, direction, and even forward movement. So the goal is really to support individuals with their career challenges wherever they may be, whatever metaphor they choose or wherever they are in their career progression. And again, we want to do this because it means a greater likelihood that they'll stay and contribute in a meaningful way to their organization. And we also know that they'll experience a higher degree of individual satisfaction when they're doing work that works for them personally. So this concept of greater contribution and personal satisfaction, at Blessing White, some of you may have heard us say this, it's about having more great days at work. And so with that in mind, we said, okay, great. What specifically can managers help with? We know they need to have the conversations more frequently. We're encouraging them to lean into these conversations, and we know that it's about more than compensation. But what are the tangible and specific things managers can do to help their employees? So we asked that question. And here's what we learned. 34% of those we surveyed said the best way managers can provide support to their employees is to help them make connections with others in the industry, in their organization, or people who share their interests. Another 25% are looking for some benchmark information, and another 25% said personal branding. And we found it interesting that this concept of connection and networking. And networking it's an interesting thing to break down because it's part of the connections that people need to further their career, either internally or outside of the organization. At the same time, it's an area that individuals struggle with. They don't have the time, they don't know where to go or how to go about it. So equipping managers to help individuals with these connections is one of the best ways a manager can lend tangible support to employees as they navigate their career. And we think that part of the reason networking feels so painful and filled with obstacles is that individuals are looking at it the wrong way. It's kind of a cringeworthy activity for many, and part of what we think we need to do is turn it on its ear and introduce a new way of approaching this concept of making connections in a way that's more accessible and candidly more powerful. We were talking a little bit about this idea that networking is cringy, and there was actually a study done at Harvard Business School that tested the way people felt when they did professional or instrumental networking. So, where you're trying to make connections purely with the purpose of advancing your career, as opposed to personal networking, where your goal is more of an emotional connection. And the research found that instrumental networking literally made people feel dirty, so much so that they had to think about taking a shower or brushing their teeth. And the research uncovered another interesting thing about networking, and this research came from a survey of lawyers at a large North American law firm. And what they found was this, that people with greater power, in this case the senior lawyers, felt less dirty about professional networking than did their junior colleagues. There was a huge difference between people of different ranks. And what we believe is that it's not about throwing networking out altogether, but we do think that a reframe of the concept is required, because it's our theory that the individuals with higher ranks felt less dirty about networking, not because they had a higher rank, and the research shows this, but because they had something of value that they were able to contribute to the relationship. And so reframing networking is less about pushing your business card to someone and making it more about an exchange of value, we think is the critical reframe that needs to happen. So why care about all of this? As an organization, why do you want to focus so much on career development when what you really want people focused on is the job that they're doing and the contribution that they're making? That's what you really want, right? So here's why, if we haven't already hinted at and certainly made the case with respect to engagement. The bottom line is that by focusing on career development, you will improve the engagement level of your employees. And at Blessing White, we look at engagement as a combination of what the individual is contributing to the organization and the personal satisfaction that they're getting out of their career. You can see that these two factors overlap in the job. So when both satisfaction and contribution are maximized, you have full engagement. People are in that orange triangle or the apex. And so if you avoid career conversations, you're avoiding half of this equation, and you're really missing an opportunity to impact engagement. And our research confirms this. So career support has a tremendous impact not only on retention, but on engagement. In fact, 83% of respondents indicated that career support has some impact or greatly impacts their level of engagement. So again, the stakes are high. You want to keep your employees, yes, but more importantly, you want to keep them engaged. And when they do walk out the door, they're leaving for better opportunities and growth and for more interesting work. The goal, again, is to help them get what they want, ideally with you, to keep retention low and engagement high. So with the benefit of this information and the knowledge that career development, again, impacts engagement and retention in a meaningful way, what is it that organizations should do? I'm going to turn things over to Zach, who's going to share some of the inherent tension in career development, some of which the research brought to life, and he's going to talk briefly about how to shift the perspective around career development.
All right, thanks, Leah. The foundation of our point of view is built on a paradox. We saw it in the research. Career is deeply personal, and yet it requires support from others. It's undeniably unique to every individual, while at the same time being completely dependent on the people around us. So our philosophy around career development is built on this interplay between introspection and interconnection. We directly acknowledge the dichotomy of both the personal and interpersonal nature of career. There's a tension. There's a tension between the self-reflective, individualized aspects of career advancement. As Leah asked me earlier, how often I'm pondering my existence. This is intensely self-reflective and individualized, but then there's a tension between this and the collaboration required to move forward in my career. Our point of view is that career is about equal doses of both of these activities. We lean into this tension. You have to understand yourself, but you also have to reflect on and find out how you're coming across to other people. And then when you're ready to take action in your career, however you define it, you have to be intentional about the way you leverage your relationships, both in clarifying your career goals and then also in achieving them. So the way we like to say it is that career is both an individual sport and a team activity. So the difference here is that while our competitors focus on a more self-directed matchmaking approach to career, we believe the process to be one that's deeply personal, one that requires thoughtful reflection, and one that hinges on real human cooperation. So this is how we've structured the approach. We've thrown out the concept of a long-term career plan, and we've replaced it with one that's simple, much more simple, one that's flexible, and then most importantly, one that's useful. We frame this whole new conversation in 3 chapters. We call these chapters What's Now, What's Next, and What If. What's now is about awareness. It's an acknowledgement that your career is happening right now, every day. It's not that thing out there somewhere. You're in it. And it's important to understand that you're in it so that you can work to understand who you are, how you're wired, how others perceive you, and the relationship between the two so that you can make the most of your current role by doing more work that aligns with your values and strengths. So we found that the idea of having a long-term career plan that looked out 10 or 15 years just isn't realistic. Individuals want to be satisfied in their career today, and they want to talk about their careers more frequently and less formally right now. What's next is about discovery, about figuring out in an individualized way what success even means to you and how to take the necessary steps to support your next career move. And next means different things to different people. Next could be in the next few months, it could be in the next few years, or for some of you, next might be taking you into retirement. So we wanted to acknowledge that career is not a one-size-fits-all approach, and that career can't be done alone. So we talk about the need to build a community with which you can exchange value and support each other forward. And then the third chapter, What If, is about perspective, how to deal with frustrations in your career and what to do when things don't go according to plan, when your plans hit the fan. At some point in your career journey, your path will be disrupted, whether that's intentional or unintentional. It may be organizational change or restructure or personal life decisions. All of these things impact our careers, and preparing individuals to be resilient when the inevitable change happens is all part of our plan and our approach. So this is how we sum it up. First, frequency. Dial it up. Dial it up. If you're not already talking about career with your employees more frequently, you need to be. They want it. We saw it in the research. It has a real impact on engagement, and in turn has a real impact on productivity, on the bottom line. So don't avoid it. Lean into it. The second thing is formality. Dial it down. We believe that incorporating career discussions into the more regular cadence of your conversations with your employees is going to make it feel much more natural. So in your weekly or your regular one-on-ones, you can talk about not just what's getting done, but also about whether or not it's aligned with your people's values, interests, and strengths, because that's what they want to talk about. Number 3, focus. Focus on what matters. People want to talk about their values. They want to talk about what's important to them. People want to talk about their personal definition of success, and they want to do more work that satisfies these things. So again, it's not just about promotions and raises. We see that across the board in the research. People want more than that out of their careers, and they want more than that out of their conversations with you, with their managers. The fourth piece is to reframe. Reframe ideas like networking. Leah mentioned it earlier. Our career program reframes the concept of networking, and we talk about it more in the context of community building, about exchanging value rather than just asking for something, which goes back to that study that demonstrates how when you have something to offer, the concept of networking was far less cringeworthy. It's this mutual exchange that we speak to, the sense of community that feels far more relevant to today's workforce. The fifth piece is fit. Fit. As a manager, you know what opportunities are available in the organization. You then need to understand the unique needs of your employees and then to broker the connections, connect those dots. You should not hoard talent, but share. Share the talent you have for the greater good of the organization and the greater good of the individual. And as counterintuitive as it may seem, this will actually work to increase engagement and productivity. And then the sixth piece is fallback. Change will happen. Disruption will happen. So you have to think about how you can equip your employees with the buffers and the tools that they need to fall back on in times of change so that they can achieve the forward movement that career resilience will bring them following a disruption. So we talk about frequency, formality, focus, reframing, fit, and fallback. So that wraps up the presentation portion of the discussion. I believe we'll turn it over to Kayla for the Q&A.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Zach, for that great discussion. We do have some time left. We've got about 15 minutes or so to answer some questions. So just as a reminder, if you do have a question for our presenters, be sure to enter it into the Q&A module at this time. They covered a lot in the last 35 minutes or so, and there's still a lot more information that you could discuss. So we do encourage that you continue the conversation with them beyond today's session. Leah, if you can go ahead and advance it to that last slide, that way folks on the call have access to your contact information. We encourage you to stay in touch with them. And we will also be sending everyone a link to a follow-up blog post where they'll be addressing some of today's key takeaways. I'd also like to remind you that the recording and slides from today will also be emailed to the address that you provided when you registered. So I just looked up at my screen and there are a lot of questions coming in, so I will go ahead and start diving into those. So Leah and Zach, I'll kind of let you guys guide the conversation as far as who wants to answer what. But the first question is, do you see a dramatic difference in attitudes about career across different generations? Are millennials more likely to switch careers?
So I'll grab that one, and this data was not cut across those generational bands, if you will. But blessingly, we partner with an organization called Future Workplace, and so I'll lean in a little bit to what they have articulated and found out. about this particular issue. And the verdict really is this, that you know, there's a question about millennials and do they switch careers more often? Are they job hoppers? The verdict really is no, that millennials themselves are not job hoppers, that there is a consistent trend in that people tend to job hop before they reach the age of 35, and I think Pew did some good research on this, and then they spend more time at employers after age 35. So it's not so much that millennials per se move around, it's more that earlier in people's careers, regardless of what generation they're in, you tend to move around a little bit more than you do later in your career. You know, I think a lot of times this question of generations and do they hop and what do they want out of career, I still think it goes back to regardless of the generation, finding work that aligns with your values, finding work that works for you, where you can grow and develop and gain that, you know, personal satisfaction that, again, is 50% of the engagement equation.
And there's like I said, there's a lot of questions coming in, so I'm trying to lump them all together because some of them are very similar to one another. So if I don't get to your question specifically, just know that I'm kind of trying to navigate these so that similar questions are kind of lumped into one. But the next question kind of is, after all is said and done, whose responsibility is it to initiate career conversations? If people want to talk about their career more often, why don't they initiate the conversations themselves?
Yeah, that's a good question. We talked a little bit about the fact that individuals want to engage in these conversations with their managers. So what gives? Why don't they initiate them? You know, and I think there's a key point here, which is that, you know, we believe that individuals own their career and they are responsible for navigating their career. It's not their manager's job. You know, we talked about the pivotal role that managers play, but ultimately each individual needs to own their own engagement. You know, I think that they probably don't initiate for maybe some of the same reasons that managers don't initiate, right? They're afraid of sending some sort of message about dissatisfaction and perhaps sending a message that they're looking to leave when in fact that may not be the case, right? We saw the research that said they're happy to stay where they are as long as they can satisfy, you know, what's important to them. So I think that, yes, individuals need to lean into these conversations, talk about what's important to them, talk about where they'd like to grow and develop, and, you know, step into this conversation confidently and engage with their managers so that they can, again, get the mutual benefit out of organizational success and personal satisfaction. I saw a question that came up, Kayla, that I think Zach might be pretty excited to respond to, and I think it was a question about what strategies we suggest people employ to build resilience. And I'm just wondering, Zach, if you'd like to talk a little bit about, you know, how we think about career resilience and what we think is critically important to help that resilience.
Yeah, of course. We think it's so important that we built an entire chapter around just resilience. And so we, you know, in order to pick an approach, we decided to simplify and try to create something that applies to a variety of disruptions across the board. We're going to face different things at different times, but whether the disruption is a small or a large one, we tend as humans in the workplace to experience a similar set of emotion across the board when we're faced with a disruption. And typically these emotions are negative. We're uncertain. We might be afraid. We might be resigned, whatever the case may be. And so, as I mentioned before, Chapter 3, which deals with this question, is built on the foundation of perspective. So we talk about when you hit a disruption, what you've hit is a change. Your career course has changed, and change is a form of loss. And so to deal with loss, you need to gain perspective in order to process this loss. And so we build out a framework of a couple of tools. The first is to establish buffers in your life. This is simple self-care, and yet the majority of participants that we found aren't engaging in any sort of intentional self-care. We run away from our problems pretty adeptly with Netflix and whatnot, but we often don't intentionally get the space we need to then create some movement. So the second piece is creating movement using storytelling as a way to sort of see the chessboard from a higher level, so to speak, and to see what moves brought you to this point and then what your options might be moving forward.
And this is for, either one of you guys can take this question, but how do you advise managers to keep in mind individual preferences as they tailor the conversation plans for team members?
Yeah, so again, it's about getting into conversations with your employees where you understand their personal values, that you understand, the kind of work that works for them. And so, make space again in your regular one-on-ones, in your regular conversations. Don't sit down and have the career talk that winds up feeling awkward and forced. You can have those twice-a-year career conversations, and it's not an either-or, it's an and-also equation, and also make sure that you're weaving things into your regular interaction with your employees that helps you get at, values and skills and abilities. So for example, you might ask questions about what skills do you enjoy using, where do you want to develop? Brainstorm what would increased satisfaction in your job look like for you right now. When you ask some questions like those, you start to get at what's important to that individual and can help tailor the matching, if you will, of individual to new opportunities or stretch assignments in a more meaningful way.
In our next question, actually, I'm really interested to hear what you guys have to say. I think this is something that I've seen a lot of, especially in working with some of our partners or vendors where, I personally see this in changeover. But in today's work environment, one can often, it's kind of a revolving door of managers, and it's not unusual to see that where someone has 3 managers within the span of 1 year. How would you suggest that people manage this lack of continuity as it pertains to their career?
That's a great question.
Go ahead, Zach. Why don't you jump in?
The interesting part about that question is that it actually speaks to the larger lack of continuity in general across careers. And so we designed our approach in that gray area because it's not just manager turnover that people are experiencing, but large-scale restructures seem to happen more and more frequently. The market shifts. And so when people are experiencing a lack of continuity, they're experiencing the new reality of work. And so our approach with dealing with what's now, what's next, and what if, the way that we've framed our approach gets at the higher level questions, the more macro skills necessary to engage with your career. And then that goes back to our point of view that this is something that isn't an annual thing. Now this is something that you have to own, and you have to assess, and you have to nurture, and you have to manage continually, if not daily, weekly. You need to set aside time, block your calendar out for that extra 30 minutes and sit down and assess where you are. And so whether it's a manager specifically or the larger context that's changing, career is something that employees now need to own as a daily part of their lives, not just something that they can track a few times a quarter.
I also think, if I could jump in, that it's, as we're saying, manager plays an important role, and you need to think about who else is in your career community. So the idea of having, and Josh Burson just also released a great video and speaks to this as well, this idea that you also should have sponsors within the organization and mentors. So it's not just the manager who should be aware of what's important to you, but look for those sponsors, look for mentors within the organization, expand your network and exchange that value that we talked about. Don't push your brand, but how can you engage in a mutually beneficial relationship with people and expand that career community that you have. So career community, sponsors, mentors, other people beyond your manager.
Great ideas. So the next person's question is, they're asking actually specifically, and maybe you want to go back to the slide, the approach to career development, and talk a little bit more. They're asking if you could elaborate or provide more examples around the fallback component.
Sure. Fallback comes down to the discussion around resilience and around disruption. And so when we're talking about ways to equip employees with the buffers and the tools that they need, again, this is simply a matter of seeking to provide perspective, but also to partner with the employee in finding perspective, and which comes to something that Leah was talking about earlier, really understanding the employee's individuality as far as what's important to them, what matters to them, what they enjoy doing. The nice thing about this approach is that it's not rocket science. It's a matter of taking the time to understand your employee as a human, as a person, and that will actually inform the way that you manage them in the workplace. You can't manage who you don't know. And so when we're talking about fallback, if you understand what's important to an employee, you can understand what this disruption has probably caused for them in the way of negative emotions. You understand what they were trying to do, what mattered to them, what they felt like they were good at. And so when something interrupts their career journey, you'll have a deeper understanding of how they're experiencing this disruption, and then you can help them frame the story. Okay, what led to this? And with some healthy distance provided by your buffers, and with the larger perspective of backing away just a little bit, now that we understand what brought you here, this can help us illuminate the options ahead of you, and then again to empower them to say this story is written with the pen that you're holding. Your career is your career, and you do have options, and you do have the power to rewrite what's next, but you do need to have a fallback plan.
I'm going to go ahead and take one more question, and then we'll go ahead and close it out. But the last question I wanted to address is, how can orgs move beyond notions of career pathing to be more helpful to employees?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think there are a couple of things. When you think about career pathing and traditionally think about it as promotion, I think one of the things that organizations need to think about is what is it that they reward and what do they highlight? So, for example, organizations often will send out announcements or talk about praise people who have gotten promoted, right? That's often something that goes out in a company newsletter or in other fashions. What kind of message does that send? If you want to send the message that it's not just about moving up, but also about stretching out of your comfort zone, taking on a new assignment, working on a large-scale project that allows you to grow and helps the organization, I think we need to look at how we send messages that support those kinds of moves as much as, we've historically supported and praised the career pathing that is, purely an upward career path or career climb. So I think that's some of it. And again, I mentioned even in that example some of the other things. So how do we look at stretch assignments? How do you give people, mentors and sponsors across the organization? So it's not just about, moving from role to role, but more about spreading the news about who you are and what your reputation is, what your skills are, what your values are, more broadly throughout the organization.
Well, thank you both for your time. I'm going to go ahead and leave the questions up because there are still some questions coming in, but I want to give you guys some time to answer a few of these. And so, as I mentioned earlier, both of our presenters have agreed to write a follow-up blog post where they'll be diving a little bit deeper into the conversation from today. And several of you actually sent some comments, and they weren't questions; they were more statements or comments or feedback based on what the presenter said. And I think that they're worth sharing. And so we won't share your name, but we might be sharing some of the comments that you added, just because I think they are value add for everyone to see. I apologize. I know in the chat wasn't opened, and so most of the attendees on the call couldn't see some of the comments that were coming in. But what I will do is I'll go ahead and wrap things up. So thank you to today's speakers, and again, thanks to everyone who attended for your time and attention. We do hope that you'll join us again for future webinars. Until then, do catch up on the content that you've missed by downloading past recordings. Information on those recordings are available at gpstrategies.com. And I wish everyone on the call a wonderful and productive rest of your week.